Welcome into the All NFL Monday Huddle. My name's Adam Hoge alongside Brack from PHNX. Big, kind of crazy weekend of NFL football. The divisional round is behind us. We got a lot to talk about. The Eagles roll on for our All-City fam. We will hear from Zach Berman in about 15 minutes or so from Philly to get the latest on the Eagles. Bo, what's going on, man?
Just kind of putting things together after this weekend. I mean, I still feel awful for Mark Andrews. I feel sick to my stomach for the poor guy. Ball hit him right between the numbers, and he also had a crucial fumble in that game. Just one of the league's better tight ends, probably just in the dumps today after not being able to tie that in a 2-point conversion late for the Ravens.
Yeah, we usually start with our best and worst. I have a feeling that worst is probably going to be the same for us. I mean, I just, you really hate that to that's sports though, right? Sometimes it comes down to, some brutal mistakes. Sometimes it's a kicker. Sometimes it's, a different sport and just a horrible moment like Chris Webber in the Final Four. Like these things happen. But when it's somebody like Mark Andrews, an established veteran who, really just, he's had a great career, doesn't really ever do anything wrong. He's just so reliable. And then to not only have one, but two major mistakes at the end of last night's game. And look, the Ravens had a lot of mistakes though in that game. They just did not quite look like the same team. It looked like, and it kind of surprised me. I thought weather would be a factor, but I thought the Ravens would be able to handle it a little bit better than they did. And honestly, even in the Detroit game on Saturday night in a dome, I mean, we saw the ball getting put on the ground. So it felt like all weekend people were just having problems holding on to the ball.
Did you see the stat? I think it was like Schefter tweeted out. It was like the winning teams won the turnover battle 10-0.
Wow.
So, I mean, all the cliches, I mean, they rang true this weekend as far as winning that turnover battle. And between the four winners this week, it was a takeaway battle of 10-0. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And then quickly on my best, and then we'll get a little bit more on the Bills Ravens here off the top. But I'm gonna go with Jaden Daniels. I thought the Commanders would keep that game close. I thought there was a decent chance they could cover. I did not expect them to win, and I certainly didn't expect them to be in that much of a control like they were. And obviously they got some help too from the Lions making their own mistakes. But, in that environment, you knew Detroit was going to be loud. For Jaden Daniels to just be that poised as a rookie, it's impressive. It's impressive, the coaching. Brought up many times here. I'm here in Chicago, and it like pretty much everything the Commanders do well. It just stings Bears fans even more, partly because of the Hail Mary game earlier this year, partly because Dan Quinn could have been the Bears head coach. Cliff Kingsbury could have been their OC. People aren't quite on the they should have drafted Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams thing, because I think we still got to see that play out a little bit more, but I don't think there's any way to deny right now that Jaden Daniels is going to be a good quarterback in this league. That part is established, and just an incredible job by not only him, but that Commanders team on Saturday night to get that, just pretty much, in my opinion, just a stunning result.
Yeah. No, I mean, dominant performance. I'm going to continue my Cliff Kingsbury apology tour. I was a bad take factory as far as what my expectations were for him going even to just an offensive coordinator position after kind of fizzling out as the Cardinals head coach back in 2022. But Jaden Daniels' historic run, him coupled up with Cliff Kingsbury, that performance on Saturday night, 45 points, could have been closer to 50 if Zane Gonzalez makes a gimme. I mean, a 48 burger on the Detroit Lions. I don't care what their defense looks like in the divisional round. All very impressive. I mean, outside of the first drive ending in kind of an inexplicable Marcus Mariota stopped on fourth down, they didn't flinch the rest of the way. It was just a dominating performance by that offense. And it's Jaden Daniels, and it's like Terry McLaurin, and then not much else after that. Like, it's just kind of, an over the hill Zach Ertz making plays for him. You've got Dynamite Brown, who Amon Ra's saying he was taken ahead of him, and look who had a better game on Saturday. It was just, their offense, it's not like their offensive line isn't like a stout group. They're just kind of consistent, and they run this game to perfection. But I really think Jaden Daniels standing tall in that pocket, making throws on money downs, third and fourth down, and just connecting. It's just a killer. And then his extension of plays. I'm going to go with my best. If we're going to kind of single out performances, I know he gets a ton of love just because he's got his own podcast. His girlfriend's up in the box with Caitlin Clark and stuff. But Travis Kelce having 117 yards of Patrick Mahomes, 177 passing yards in that game. Like, he turned back the clock, and we saw vintage Travis Kelce on Saturday. Just a really great performance. Anytime they needed a big play, he's making a reception, 7 catches, the 1 touchdown. He's making big catches on third downs. I think, sometimes he gets lost in it because he's so much in the spotlight. But I thought Kelce was huge for the Chiefs and putting away the Texans in that game. The Texans, who I thought their defense played pretty well. You see all the sound bites from Will Anderson Jr. and saying it's like it's them versus the refs, but still pretty impressive to see the Chiefs punch their ticket right back to another conference championship game.
Yeah, we'll circle back on all these games because there's a lot more to discuss from all of them, including I think we got to touch on if there's any reason to still be worried about the Chiefs or not. They don't really necessarily look dominant, but they just keep winning. And then with Detroit, I think there's some big picture stuff too, even as they lose, that we got to talk about with the Lions. But let's go back to the game last night. I think it's a fair conversation to be having about the Ravens and them, continuing to kind of choke in the playoffs. I didn't think that this was like a full-blown Lamar Jackson choke, but because at the end of the day, he did lead that impressive drive down the field and get them in position to tie at the end. And Mark Andrews couldn't hang on to the ball. But, before we kind of get into that side of things, I just want to give the Bills their flowers too, because and I fell into this trap early in the week. I was like, I like the Bills at home. I've been a big believer in the Bills all season. Big believer in Josh Allen. And then I kind of fell into the Ravens hype too. And the reality that probably the Ravens roster from start to finish is probably better, probably more talented, but the Bills being at home, the weather, probably should have just stuck with the Bills the whole way. I just like what Josh Allen said after the game yesterday, giving the defense a lot of praise. They're even talking about it during the middle of that game. Like, oh, the Ravens are just bigger. They can bully them. There were times when they did, but, at the end of the day, the Bills came up with enough stops, and especially in the red zone, and we got to give them credit too. And we'll maybe get into this a little bit later, but I'm really intrigued in what they can do at Arrowhead next week, because I think Josh Allen, if you kind of closely pay attention to the Bills this year, Josh Allen just sort of had this very serious, I don't even know how to explain it. Just this is going to be our year. I'm going to will us to a Super Bowl if I can, despite the fact that they seemingly sort of stood pat with their roster this year, maybe even took a step back, it seemed like. And that's partly why, as strong as Lamar came on late in the year in terms of the MVP race, and he may even win it, I've sort of been favoring Josh Allen a little bit, not just because it feels like it's his turn to win it, because that's sometimes a factor in all this, but really because I just feel like he's done a little bit more with less, even though the overall numbers aren't there. But you just watch this Bills team every week, Bo, and it's like, oh, Khalil Shakir, Mac Hollins, he doesn't have a dominant. Well, Dalton Kincaid's pretty good, but certainly doesn't get the same recognition that maybe a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce get. So I just like what Josh Allen's done. It just seems like in crunch time, you can trust this guy a hell of a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with that. I do agree with the sentiment that he's doing more with less, or just about the same with less. It looked like this was going to be kind of a retooling year for Buffalo, and Josh Allen just kind of put the team on his shoulder. No receivers over 900 yards in the lineup, and he's going out there, and this team's a giant slayer. I mean, outside of the loss to the Ravens earlier in the season on the road, they're beating Detroit. They're beating Kansas City. And now they beat Baltimore. They survived last night. They find different ways too. They've diversified the way that they're winning on offense. I mean, pretty pedestrian. It's below average passing performance from Josh Allen, 127 through the air, but they're able to ground and pound it. He's got that kind of backfield mate and James Cook, and they're able to kind of win that way. And then, just do enough on defense. It is kind of crazy. Like, I do feel like offensively, they had opportunities to put that game away in the second half, and they kind of left the door ajar. Like, it was like punt, field goal. And maybe if they could have just found their way into the end zone, they're not sitting there nail biting at the end and needing Mark Andrews to drop that 2-point conversion. So, but that's nitpicking a little bit. But they survived, they advanced, and now they've got their date with destiny going up against the Chiefs in another conference championship game. But it's pretty crazy. Like, the self-inflicted wounds from the Baltimore Ravens were really the difference maker in here, because they didn't punt otherwise. Like, Baltimore didn't punt the football. They gave the football away in those 3 crucial turnovers, and that was the difference here. And it was just a difference of a missed 2-point conversion.
Yeah, and by the way, like, I as much as I want to kill Mark Andrews for the fumble, it's a great play to punch the ball out.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these, and they same thing in the Eagles game. Jalen Carter punching that ball out. We got to give these defensive guys credit. It's cold, and that's the type of game. I mean, you should always be going for the ball, in my opinion, but especially those type of temperatures, you're going to be able to get the ball out easier, and I think that showed in this game. Now, some of the other ones, like. And that's why I don't want to let the Lamar Jackson conversation is more. I haven't really been paying attention to it nationally. I'm sure it's raging, but like, it's a tough thing because he did a spectacular job, I thought, late in that game to try to do everything he possibly could to get them in a spot where they could have gone to overtime. But you can't ignore those turnovers in the first half. I mean, especially, an interception, I don't know the exact story on that. It looked bad. I don't know if there's a miscommunication or whatever. But the one where he just sort of like, he's trying to do too much and he just sort of puts the ball on the ground on his own. That can't happen. Not in that moment with that much on the line. Stafford had a similar fumble in the Rams game too. And I was just like, man, for a veteran like that, it's like, how in the world does that happen? So there's still has to be a little bit of put on. I think it's fair to put some on Lamar that they were even in the hole that they were, because to your point about what the Bills sort of failed to do to shut the door, I would have thought that the Ravens would have been able to take advantage of that, knowing what we knew about that Ravens team coming in, and so and that, does it feel more like a Bills win or a Ravens loss? I think I got to kind of side towards more of a Ravens loss in this one.
No, I think that's the right feel of this one. I mean, Lamar Jackson goes all season without multiple turnovers in a game. Lights get a little bit brighter, and it just kind of fuels the narrative. I mean, a guy who hasn't been able to win back-to-back playoff games in his career yet, and he's now going to be still remains the only multi-MVP winner that hasn't won a Super Bowl. So, like, you can't hide from it. It's just it's unfortunate because you see the guy play and he wills his team back into the game and puts them in a position to tie it. But I mean, the game is also lost basically in the first half by the Bills being able to capitalize on those 2 turnovers early.
Yeah, 100%. We're I think that's. I'm very intrigued on what's going to happen here with this Bills. First of all, it's kind of a weird thing. As much as I thought the Ravens were going to win, I almost like that the Bills won, because I feel like this Bills-Chiefs thing has become pretty fun, and it kind of just sets us up for a great AFC championship. It would also be cool, kind of a cool side story to see the Bills go back to the Super Bowl. It's been so long. See if they can avenge their 4 straight losses. But how they match up. Maybe when we circle back to the Chiefs a little bit later on, we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. But it is going to set up a fun matchup. We're going to touch on the Eagles here.
Unless the Chiefs win again. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's all fun and games unless we see Patrick Mahomes going right back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. No, 100%. All right. Well, the early game yesterday, Eagles and Rams. It's kind of all over the place in the fourth quarter. It looked like it was about to become a blowout. Then all of a sudden the Rams had a chance at the end with the ball. But the Eagles hold on and they advance to the NFC Championship game, which they will now host because the Lions lost. We bring in our guy, Zach Berman, right now from PHLY, who was covering the game yesterday. And Zach, your overall thoughts on what the Eagles were able to accomplish, the fact that they get a home game next week too against a division rival. All of a sudden their road to the Super Bowl kind of seems to sets up in their favor.
Sure. I'm probably using the same expression as last week, survive in advance, because that's it. That's what happened. They survived that game. Now, you give credit to Saquon Barkley, who was outstanding again against the Rams, and you could say that basically for every game this season, but set an Eagles postseason franchise record for rushing yards with 205 yards. Nick Sirianni said after the game, championship defense. And that's what they were. They came through with critical plays throughout the game. On the final 2 plays for the Rams, when they had a chance to go ahead, you saw Jalen Carter get a sack and get a pressure. Jalen Carter's continuing to develop into like the next great Eagles defensive player. They had 2 forced fumbles earlier in the second half when momentum was starting to shift. So you look at that. This is the way the Eagles have played this year. Is they're dominant on the ground. Their defense was number 1 in the league for a reason this year, and now they have a home game with a chance to go to the Super Bowl. This is a situation that I don't think the Eagles anticipated when this started.
It really was. Watching the Rams play as much as I have this season, obviously 2 games against the Cardinals. I went to the playoff game last Monday, which was just, it's crazy to think that was a week ago today, and the Rams already had another game under their belt. But it's an encapsulation of how their season went. This team was like 1-4. They were dead and buried, and they make their way to winning the NFC West. And you thought it so many times that they were going to get knocked out. The knockout punch or blow was delivered, many times from the Eagles, and they came back. What can you say about like the resiliency that you witnessed between Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay in that game?
Yeah, it's a great point, Bo, because I frankly thought when Jake Elliott misses the extra point. Okay, so I was like, oh, this – because here, I'll back up. Saquon has that 78-yard touchdown, and I'm like, that's game. Saquon called game. Then Jake Elliott misses the extra point, and I was like, I don't think this will matter that much, but there's still time. The Rams had their best drive of the game going downfield, and I also have to point out the Rams are playing in cold weather in the snow. That's unfamiliar for the Rams, right? But they have that great drive there. In the fourth quarter, make it a 1-possession game. The Eagles, who've been so good at 4-minute offense this year, go 3 and out, give the Rams the ball back. And I'll be honest, I thought at that point the Rams were going to go downfield. And I thought that missed extra point was going to be looming. So I give so much credit to the Rams for making that a close game when after Saquon's run with 4.5 minutes on the clock or so, I thought that was it. I thought the conditions, I thought the Eagles defense, I thought that was going to be too much. So for the Rams to make that as close as they did, credit to them. But ultimately, I could say the same thing about Saturday night's game in that turnovers are such a determining factor. And the Rams had 2 bad turnovers in the second half, and obviously the snow contributed to it. But the turnover differential was the key here, as it was on Saturday night, as it was against the Packers when the Eagles beat them last week.
One of the things I love about the NFL is these monumental moments in the offseason sometimes show up to matter so much in January. And I just, like, this entire season have not been able to get the Hard Knocks moment out of my head when John Mara is in Joe Shane's office, like as trying not to meddle, it seems like, as much as he can, but also being really clear about the fact that if they let Saquon Barkley go, it's going to be tough to swallow. And now here we are, and the Eagles are one game away from the Super Bowl. And I don't know, honestly, Zach, where this Eagles team would be without Saquon Barkley, because he has just been so good for them. I mean, they have a good enough roster that I think they would have been competitive this year anyway, right? But that really seems to be like it could be, if the Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl, like that's the biggest reason why, in my opinion.
Sure, it's been a magical season for Saquon. There's no other way to put it. I mean, this surpassed anyone's expectations. 2,000 yards, a 205-yard game in the playoffs. The amount of big runs that he's had, these home run runs that he had. I mean, he had a 78-yarder yesterday. He had a 60-yarder. It's incredible to watch. And the Giants let him out the door. Now, I would say, look, I'm not defending the Giants here. I don't know if he would have. I'm similar to Derrick Henry. I think a great running back can make a good team great, or a great team even better. I don't think it makes a bad team great, right? So I don't think the Giants are in the playoffs if Saquon's there. I think the Giants made their bed a year earlier when they decided to kind of commit to Daniel Jones as opposed to Saquon, right? And not address the quarterback situation. But yeah, the way that Saquon Barkley's changed the Eagles' offense, it's legitimate. It cannot be overstated. And you even go back and, like, I know this will be painful to Bears fans, but when the Eagles were able to get Jalen Carter the year before, had to be a difference maker on defense. And I think for all the you look at all these decisions the Eagles have made, the bottom line is they're the more talented team in most of these games they play. And they've gambled on talent. They've brought in players who other teams have found, whether it's too expensive or there's risk here. And the Eagles have made it work. And across this roster, there's so much talent. That's why they're here, and that's frankly why they've been in the championship game 6 times now since 2000. That's not by accident.
And real quick on that, sorry, Bo, just like, I was thinking about that during the game. First of all, Jalen Carter is just so fun to watch. And I mean, he might be the best. He might end up being, by this time next year, we might be talking about him as like the best defensive lineman in the entire league. Honestly, the trajectory he's on. And I was thinking about that during the game, like kind of what you just said, Zach. Like, good teams gamble on talent. And I feel like bad organizations find reasons to make excuses to not gamble, right? Like, I mean, you had the Jalen Carter thing. You had, and look, the Bears got a solid right tackle out of that in Darnell Wright, but we're talking about an all-pro type player already in Jalen Carter. And the conversation at that time was, do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the culture to be able to take on somebody with character issues? And I think the one thing we've learned a couple things about that situation was, one, obviously the Eagles are a better organization to be able to handle that. But also, two, it seems like those character issues were, I don't want to say overblown because they were very serious at the time. But I think also props to whether you're giving the Eagles credit or Jalen Carter credit or both. I mean, unless I'm missing something, you're there every day, Zach. I mean, he doesn't seem to be causing any problems whatsoever. It just seems like a pretty professional football player already.
Yeah, and he's made jumps from year to 1 to year 2. And look, there was an incident earlier this year where he was late for a meeting, right? The Eagles wanted him to be in better shape going into year 2. But by and large, and Nick Sirianni said this yesterday, it's not just talent. Like, everyone looks at Jalen Carter and says he's talented. Jalen Carter played 69 of 71 snaps yesterday. His 2 best snaps came on the last 2 snaps of the game. This is someone who, when Clint Hurt, the defensive line coach, came here during the offseason, the first thing he said is you have to be in better condition to take on more snaps this year. And Jalen Carter's done everything that they've asked. So you have to look at these character questions in the draft and say, is this something that's going to improve over time? Yeah. Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the leadership in place? But you also have to understand that you're dealing with 21, 22-year-olds. What are they going to be as they improve? And I can say this, like, I'm not confessing or I guess, professing to say that I'm involved in every detail there and know every detail there. But one thing I can say is that to a man, I've spoken to multiple players about this, people behind the scenes. Jalen Carter loves playing football. And when you start with that, when you start with like the foundation that this guy wants to be great, then you can usually improve everything else around him.
It was such a strange moment, Hoge. I think we were together at the combine when the warrant was issued for Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
He missed his interview. I think he was coming back and doing interviews with teams. He wasn't working out. And like, it is an absolute credit to Philly in the cultures you guys had kind of outlined here, and obviously the infrastructure, to where like two dysfunctional organizations like the Cardinals, who also passed on him, traded back up into the top 10, took Paris Johnson Jr., and it had Carter there. They could have selected him. They just didn't have the luxury of taking a guy with red flags. And I mean, now it just looks like a miss, but add context to it. Like, credit to Howie Roseman and the Eagles for being in that position to be able to take that risk on a tremendously talented player. Like, no doubt about it, consensus best talent on the defensive side in that draft.
But isn't it funny, guys, when you just like, even in the Saquon Barkley case, which is different because that's, he's obviously a definition of a pro with, no character concerns whatsoever. When the Eagles get him, it's just more so the running back market. Like, the conversation was, is it worth paying that much money for a running back? But it's like, as soon as a team like the Eagles does it, you're like, oh, that's probably going to work. Like, I remember on draft night when the Bears made that trade and the Eagles took Jalen Carter, like, oh, he's going to be a stud there. Right. And same thing, I remember free agency last year. It's like, oh, Saquon went to the Eagles. Well, it's just like good organizations just, they take advantage of these other teams that are afraid to. The Chiefs have done it a million times during their run here. Oh, nobody wants this guy? We'll take him. Sure, we'll take a flyer on him. He'll be great here. It's just funny.
Yeah, it used to be the Patriots, right? With Belichick. It was just like some guy would be cast off and they think everybody's going to turn into Randy Moss once again. And like, we forget about the times it doesn't hit, but so many times you're watching them play big games in January and you're like, it just made so much sense.
Yeah. I've spoken to Howie Roseman about this. I've spoken to Jeffrey Lurie about this, about not being afraid of taking risks. And look, they don't all work out. And when they don't work out, one thing you have to do is you have to move on quickly and kind of be honest with where your roster is. But I give the Eagles credit with doing that, with gambling on talent. And the infrastructure is important, but ultimately, I mean, talent wins out. And I'll usually take the talented, tough teams over the teams that are afraid to make decisions. And I've always thought that whether it's draft or free agency, if you find yourself trying to talk yourself out of a player, it's usually a sign it's a good player. If you have to convince yourself, like, oh, this might be a good pick, that's where you have to be concerned. And I think where the Eagles have made mistakes in the draft, frankly, is when they've had to try to talk themselves into somebody, as opposed to when the rest of the league's trying to talk themselves out of somebody.
Zach, let me ask you this. Like with Josh Allen, he passes for 127 yards, finds the end zone with his legs, and people are like, that's a hero. When Jalen Hurts passes for 120 yards and, rushes for a big touchdown, people are calling HR on him. Like, what's the level of concern now with the Eagles quarterback, just under 260 yards passing through 2 playoff games?
Yeah, Nick Sirianni will appreciate your point. Now, to be fair, Jalen didn't look good yesterday, especially after the injury. He injured his knee, came back in, and he couldn't move well. And when the pressure was coming, he couldn't get out of the way. You saw that on the safety. You saw that on the second down sack on the Eagles' last drive. And so I think Jalen could have played better. But I also look at it, Jalen didn't turn the ball over yesterday, right? That's one thing Nick points to, the efficiency. Jalen Hurts is in the NFC Championship game for the second time in 3 years. Going back to when Jalen was in college, Jalen Hurts has never missed the playoffs in a year that he started. Like college football playoffs at Alabama, college football playoffs at Oklahoma. Becomes the starter with the Eagles in 2021. They make the playoffs. 2022, they make the Super Bowl. 2023, they make the playoffs. 2024, they're in the NFC Championship game. And I get it. Like Jalen needs to play better at times. There's no secret there. He's missing on throws. When he was injured, he couldn't move as well. But there is something to the fact that he's in the winner's circle often. and that's what Nick Sirianni points to. And I don't know if wins and losses is a quarterback stat. I think that can be a stretch, but I think your team wins and loses often because of the way your quarterback plays, because of the decisions that he makes one way or the other. And Jalen Hurts has what, one interception since the bye week. He's not making losing plays. He's not making enough winning plays. He did have that 40-plus yard rush yesterday on the opening drive, longest run of the game, but he's not making losing plays. He's playing within the offense at times. And I will also say this: when the Eagles badly needed a drive yesterday after the Rams scored, he brought them downfield and was able to put them in a good spot. So, yeah, I mean, look, Josh Allen's going to be the MVP this year, or Lamar Jackson's going to be the MVP this year. But Josh Allen's been playing better. I would say I can't defend Jalen there, but I do think it's not a coincidence that Jalen's teams often win.
Zach, I know it's only Monday, but what is your level of concern about that knee? Yeah, I love that Jalen finished the game. I didn't necessarily love his answer, in his post game interview. It didn't breed confidence, but I mean, it's. I guess if I had to guess around, it seems like something he'll play through, but maybe won't be 100%. So, what's your level of concern?
Yeah, I'm expecting him to play through it. He said as much. Now Jalen after the game says he'll have to see how this week goes, and my antenna goes up, and I ask Jalen, I say, hey, I just want to clarify. Does that mean your status is in question? And he said, that's a great question. We have to see kind of how this week goes, but he's confident he will play, and I'm expecting Jalen to play. Jalen, now I don't know if he'll be 100%, and I think that when you look at, he left that first Washington game with the concussion. I'm sorry, the second Washington game with the concussion. And look, he clearly wants to be out there. I think he will push through it. But if he can't move well, then that certainly affects the Eagles' offense. It affects what Jalen's able to do. So I think that's going to turn into being the major storyline this week.
And it's round 3 between Washington and Philadelphia, and they split. Washington hasn't lost a game since November. People, obviously, odds are going to be in the favor of Philadelphia here, but I'm sure the team's going to be saying all the right things when they start to build up to this division rival showdown here in the conference championship game.
Yeah, look, I've seen both teams now play against each other twice. I think the Eagles are the more talented team. I think the Eagles are the better team. The Eagles are at home. There's a lot of factors going in the Eagles' favor. That said, Jaden Daniels is hot right now. And Washington, what their mantra is anywhere, anybody, anywhere, anytime. They went up to Detroit and won that game. And I thought Detroit was the best team in the NFC. And they didn't just win. I mean, they were outstanding in that game. And the Eagles are dealing with a quarterback injury here. So circumstances matter. I'm expecting the Eagles to win the game because I think the Eagles are the better team, and they're at home. The Eagles are favored for a reason. But, man, I'm so impressed with what Washington did. The one thing I'll say is I don't think Washington has quite the pass rush that it's going to take in this game. And you saw the Rams were able to get to the quarterback. The Commanders don't have the same type of pass rush that the Rams do. So I'm leaning toward the Eagles here, but quarterbacks are the biggest difference. And what Jaden Daniels is doing right now is hard to argue.
Yeah, 100%. Should be a fun one. I mean, the Commanders are a hell of a story. We're going to talk a little bit more about them here. Their win over the Lions. I'll say this though: if you've been following our work at ALLCITY and any of our networks, we go all out for the Super Bowl. We're going to be there in a couple of weeks, and it would be a lot of fun if the Eagles get in there and are playing in that game. As much as it'll probably add a lot more work to your plate, Zach. Selfishly,
Yeah.
I'd be okay with that result. You've covered Super Bowls with the Eagles, without the Eagles, but one game away, man.
Yeah, this is my 13th year on the beat. This would be the third Super Bowl that the Eagles would be in during that period. So it's much different when you're covering the team you're covering it as opposed to the Super Bowl at large. But it's also what makes it fun because everyone there is trying to learn the team, and you're the expert on the team. So We'll see what happens. I don't think Sunday's going to be a gimme. I think Sunday's going to be a difficult one. We'll see what happens with Jaden Daniels.
Let me sneak one more in there because Kellen Moore obviously picking up some traction as a head coaching candidate. They've gone through this. Last time they were in the Super Bowl, they had both their top coordinators take head coaching jobs. Is there any concern as they go through this once again?
Yeah, I mean, I think beyond this season, sure, because Jalen Hurts has had now 4 coordinators in 4 years, right?
Wow.
So well, it would be the 4th coordinator in 4 years next year, I should say, if Kellen Moore leaves. You know, he had Shane Steichen for 2 years as his OC. Then he had Brian Johnson. He has Kellen Moore this year. So if Kellen Moore leaves, and you have to think back to when Jalen Hurts was in college, he had a different offensive coordinator every single year of college. The only time he's had the same coordinator back-to-back years was Shane Steichen going from 21 to 22. So yeah, this is something that the Eagles must monitor. Now, as the organization said in the past, and as Nick Sirianni said last week, this is part of winning, right? When the Eagles, when they won the Super Bowl in 2017, Frank Reich leaves for a head coaching job. If you have success, you're going to lose coaches. It's the reality of it. Now, I think the Eagles feel good about Vic Fangio staying. That's part of why he's here. He provides that continuity. But I would think, and I'll defer to our colleagues at DLLS, but I would think Kellen Moore, from what I've heard, is a top candidate down there.
Yeah, and they might have the patience to wait on him through the Super Bowl. Unlike some of these other teams that are chasing Ben Johnson right now, which we need to talk about that right now too, because the Lions. I think we all thought the Lions were going to be that team that were going to be delaying these coaching searches, and now all of a sudden, in fact, just as we're sitting here, reports coming out that Aaron Glenn is already set up to visit both the Saints and the Jets for second in-person interviews. So both those teams looking at Aaron Glenn as well. So we'll see how it plays out with Kellen Moore and the Eagles. Zach, thanks so much. We'll continue to be following you at ZBerm. All the great work, PHLY. And yeah, it'll be a busy week. We'll be watching as you guys get ready for the NFC Championship.
Sounds good. Appreciate coming on.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is. Zach Berman, been with us all season with this Eagles run. So I feel like, but we've talked about the Commanders. Let's approach this from the Lions side of things, them losing this game stunningly. And my question that is sort of involved with this, it seems like they're pretty much convinced they're going to lose Ben Johnson. It seems to be a given now that Ben is ready to take one of these jobs. He's got 3 teams that are going to be chasing him pretty hard this week. Aaron Glenn, I don't know if we should be surprised by this, considering how the Lions defense sort of fell apart late in the year. Maybe that's a side conversation. But do you feel like the Lions missed their window here? All of a sudden, you look at them, as much as it's been great with Jared Goff, I think you have to be concerned about losing Ben Johnson and what type of effect that's going to have not only on Jared, but the offense, because it's not like Jared Goff's in this classic quarterback like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes where you're like, oh, he'll be able to survive a coordinator switch. He's going to keep carrying them. I really wonder what this Lions team is going to look like if they end up losing both coordinators.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I had that kind of feeling come over me with minutes to spare in the game when it was pretty much the writing was on the wall that the Commanders were going to walk out of there with a win. It's just like, this was 4 years in the making. I mean, going back to Campbell taking over there and the infamous press conference, and then them kind of hitting the scene, kind of ending Aaron Rodgers' Green Bay career, and the step-by-step that they took. And it's, so many people believe like this, the window is going to be like wide open, but it's so slim because of the point that Zach just made. Heavy is the crown. What comes with winning and success is people want to take from your organization. And, Philly went through it when Gannon and Steichen exited, and, they had to switch up coordinators, a season later. Like they blew out they brought in Fangio, they brought in Kellen Moore after blowing out Brian Johnson and the DC down there. They had to switch up play calling midway through the season. And it's not as easy as like, hey, we've got an in-house guy that we like, and we're just going to promote him, or that they've got an idea externally. It's the continuity is just completely out the window. and you have really no idea how that's going to impact, especially the most important position in all sports, quarterback. So, yeah, I think that it's going to be a wait and see, like who they get in there post Ben Johnson and potentially Aaron Glenn. Is shockingly, he still gets 2 interviews, as you mentioned, with the Jets and the Saints, and they're crazy enough organizations to hire him. And then you got to figure out who they get in both those spots. Those are wholesale changes that are tough to overcome, in an off season's time.
Yeah, I mean, there's track records for losing coordinators to at least delay some progress. And I will say, I was watching Dan Campbell at a press conference earlier today. I was watching some of that, or at least some clips from it, and I do like what he said in that, when it comes to an offensive coordinator specifically, the list of candidates is going to be down to guys that fit what they're doing. So, there's not going to be. I think what's cool about Dan Campbell is this organization right now clearly has a style of football that they're going to play, and they're going to be physical. And I think as long as he's the head coach there, they're going to keep that identity. But that might reduce your pool of candidates too. So it'll be interesting to see if they promote from within, or if they go outside. I can't imagine what it's like being a Lions fan right now, because the hype, the excitement. Yeah. Well, I was actually in Nashville over the weekend with my wife. We just kind of took a weekend off to go see some music and stuff. And, it was fun walking around especially on Saturday, because there was Lions fans everywhere. There was Chiefs fans everywhere. I don't know if they were just local or also there for the weekend, but you just kind of feel the excitement with the Lions. And it's just to have it so just to not even be really that competitive in that game was thoroughly shocking. And it just sort of feels like maybe a little bit of I don't think they're going to go away, but it just feels like a little bit of maybe this was their year with everything lining up, with Ben Johnson staying when they probably didn't think he would last year. It just seems like a tough spot for them right now.
Yeah, I think the roster is in such a good place. Credit to Brad Holmes for being the architect of that. And once they get healthier again on the defensive side, you add Hayden Hutchinson back there. If they can at least get one of these coordinator hires correct, maybe even on the defensive side, that could be their identity and keep their head above water in a tough division, albeit the NFC North went 0-3 in these playoffs. And they have way more than enough talent to survive just on talent alone. But as far as kind of separating themselves like they were able to do throughout the regular season, at least, are they going to have the ability to do that with all these big changes potentially incoming for those guys? So it's really going to be one of the more fascinating offseason stories that's going to come at you quick, because the reports are Ben Johnson's more motivated than he's been the past 2 off seasons to get at one of these head coaching jobs. So it just feels like he's just not a guy that you just say promote him and we've got the next Ben Johnson, because what Ben Johnson was able to do as far as the innovation, the offensive innovation, that's not easily replicated.
So let me ask you this, Bo. Just want your opinion on it. If you're Ben Johnson, which job are you taking between the Bears, the Raiders, and Jaguars? Because all 3 of these teams are going to come after him really hard this week.
Yeah.
And they all kind of got their own pluses and minuses. There's been a lot of reporting about Ben wanting his own GM, which he's probably not going to get with the Bears or the Jags. Maybe he can get that with the Raiders, but they don't have an obvious quarterback in Vegas. So which way you going?
Man, that is such a tough question. I liked your point that you made on social media that when the Bears, it was reported that they were in on Tomlin, potentially trading for Tomlin, that they would be willing to open up their checkbooks for a coach, because Tomlin's not exactly the cheapest of coaches out there. He's one of probably the top paid coaches in the league. So it doesn't seem like that's going to be a determining factor. But the other stuff. If it was me personally, I think the best situation, probably roster wise, Chicago, followed by Jacksonville. The quarterback situation, but it doesn't seem like that's a big factor for Ben Johnson. We heard that Ben Johnson wanted Sam Howell in Washington, and he was willing to stick with there, and he got the reclamation project in Jared Goff the last couple of years, so he doesn't seem to be shy away from not having the quarterback solution figured out. So that's really going to be interesting to see what he values as far as if it's to be in lockstep with a general manager. The best option is, because it's kind of a blank slate, is Las Vegas.
Yeah, and that's where I think sometimes fans sort of gloss over that reality, in that not every coach wants to work with a young quarterback. A lot of coaches like to be with veterans who may not be overall as talented, but you just know that you can trust them to run what you're asking them to run at all times and make the reads that you're asking them to read. And I don't think we know enough about what Ben Johnson wants. That's why I really felt like that Jacksonville job sort of threaded the needle on a lot of different things, in that Trevor Lawrence is sort of in the middle of both being an established veteran, but also, having enough reps and games under his belt, having been in the playoffs before, that he's not also a rookie or a quarterback going into his second year like Caleb Williams will be. But for them to not move on from Trent Baalke will be fascinating to see the fallout of that. Because if we find out that's the job he wanted and he goes on to have success somewhere else, and the Jags were just being stubborn on moving on from Trent Baalke, I think we're going to look at that one for a long time as being a major fumble by the Jaguars, because they could have paired Ben Johnson with Trevor Lawrence, who they've already paid a ton of money, and they got to get that situation right. But to your point about the Raiders, if it really is important and he's aligned with the GM, he wants to bring in his own guy, and the Raiders are offering him that opportunity, well, there might be a veteran quarterback out there that he already knows that he's going to have access to, that he's willing to work with. Maybe he's watching what Sam Darnold did with the Vikings and is like, I could do that. Just to name one example. I don't know that we know that. On the other hand, Bo, he may have been watching USC tape like we were in Chicago and been blown away by Caleb Williams and thinking, oh, I'm the guy that can get that guy going, right? Because he just has all the raw talent in the world. And I think we're going to have our answer in the next few days, by the end of this week, probably, when we start to see Ben Johnson go in person to these three organizations.
Yeah, the biggest surprise here is his availability now, that nobody was expecting, with Detroit going into that game Saturday night. And then it became, a possibility come Sunday. So, yeah, that should move quickly. And, there's reports that most of these jobs should be accounted for going basically into the Super Bowl. We're not going to have most of them kind of dragged out like we were expecting, with two Lions coordinators busy with their respective team.
Meanwhile, we got to finish with the Texans and the Chiefs just to close out the show. Three of these four games, for those that like to gamble, the spreads, there were some wild situations going on with the spreads late in these games. And it started with this Chiefs game. They block a field goal. They were up 11. They blocked what looked like a chip shot field goal that would have made it 8, which would have had the Texans covering. But then they have the weird safety situation. And so if you were somebody that had it at 9.5 instead of 8.5, that might have screwed you. So there's a lot of things going on here, just in terms of an entertainment gambling standpoint late in this game. I never really felt like the Chiefs were in that much danger of losing. You could definitely look back on this as a Texans fan and be like, yeah, we had our kicker problems in this game. We, a couple balls bounced the other way. Maybe we would have had a chance. I guess my question to you is, as we close out the show, the Chiefs really at no point in this season have looked dominant. But does that matter?
No, I think it's really just a credit to Reed and Mahomes and their ability to kind of find ways to win and really diversified that throughout the season. And sure, there's a lot of luck that plays into it, but then also putting themselves in a position to be the beneficiaries of that luck going in their favor. But yeah, when it should have been 14-14 and they missed the PAT, that's just, you feel bad for Houston, because then Kansas City pulls away at that point, and that was their one opportunity. CJ Stroud, got to get back to the drawing board, see kind of where he suffered kind of a sophomore slump after really kind of taking the NFL by storm in his rookie season. But man, 8 sacks. They were just pinning their ears back and getting after him all game long. I imagine like shoring up that offensive line for them is going to be key this offseason. But yeah, Kansas City, I think it benefits them playing in all these different types of games and being able to win ugly is certainly a skill now in this day and age in the NFL.
Yeah, sitting here on Monday, I am thoroughly confused about this AFC Championship game. It feels like from the Bills side, if you're a Bills fan and you're like, man, can we actually get over the hump, beat Mahomes, get into the Super Bowl? This would be the year because the Chiefs they don't look like they're that dominant. Mahomes is still putting up just sort of average numbers along the way. On the other hand, it always feels like the Chiefs have an extra gear they can get to, and they've kind of gotten to the point that the Patriots got to during their run where it's like they know when to turn it on. They know when to hit that switch and when they can, sort of save some fuel for when it really matters. And, I guess if I had to go with a gut feeling right now on Monday, my guess would be at Arrowhead at home, the Chiefs will find a way to do it because that's what they do. But I also want to believe that going back to what I was saying earlier in the show about Josh Allen, that he just seems so determined this year to will that Bills team over the hump that it certainly wouldn't shock me if he went in there and found a way to be the best quarterback on the field on Sunday and win that game.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some feel a little bit to 2021 where it's like Cincinnati. Can the Bills kind of channel Lou Anarumo and Joe Burrow in that game? Can they get the defensive performance necessary in the clutch play from the quarterback? It certainly seems like they're built to do that. And the Chiefs weren't exactly like a juggernaut that season either. Can they finally get the job done like they did earlier this season? Wasn't that game in Buffalo though between KC and the Bills?
Yeah.
So, just like the Bills were able to kind of get back on track at home when they lost on the road earlier in the regular season to the Ravens, can the Chiefs do the same thing? But, I find myself like you wanting kind of Josh Allen to change the narrative a little bit come next weekend.
Yeah. And by the way, quick shout out to the Texans too. I mean, I feel like they flew under the radar. They didn't really seem to reach the next level that they thought that maybe could have. And CJ Stroud kind of had a down year. They had that disappointing Christmas game where they only scored 2 points against the Ravens. And then all of a sudden you look up at the end of the year and you're like, they won a playoff game again. Like they played the Chiefs pretty hard, So DeMeco Ryans 2 years in is doing a pretty good job. So I just, got to throw a few flowers at the Texans at the end of the season.
I think they still have a little bit of ways to go. They got to really kind of add some more talent to that roster because, like, keep in perspective, they snuck into the playoffs last year and got to face Joe Flacco and the Browns. Mm-hmm. And then this year they face maybe ahead of a schedule Chargers team that just ran out of gas. But no, I mean, you win 2 playoff games a playoff game in back-to-back seasons. It's not nothing. It's I think they got the head coach, they got the quarterback. And then they can just kind of continue to build around that and continue to take stranglehold of that bad division.
Yeah, it's probably plenty of Bears and Cardinals fans watching the show right now that would take that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So good stuff, Bo. Great. Always appreciate it. Thanks to Zach Berman for joining us too. Eagles roll on. We will as well. Couple championship games on Sunday to watch. Can't wait. We'll be back on Monday to break it down and see if the Eagles can roll on to the Super Bowl, see what the matchup ends up being. Should be a lot of fun. So thank you, by the way. I saw some comments throughout the show too from Connor and others just saying it's a good show. So appreciate you guys being here and watching along the ways. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Find us the podcast version too. Just hit subscribe on there if you don't mind. Help grow the show. We greatly appreciate it. We got a lot more coming your way with the championship weekend, Super Bowl. To share too on where the show's headed with the NFL draft season. Going to take over right as soon as the Super Bowl is over. And again, we will be there in New Orleans in a couple weeks. Looking forward to that as well. For Bo Brack, I'm Adam Hoge. We'll talk to you next week.
We all silly like the mayor.